In the kingdom of Veyrath, wolves were not born equal. From the moment a pup opened its eyes, its whole future was already decided by one word: rank. Alphas were born to rule, betas were born to serve them, and omegas, the lowest of all, were born to be forgotten. Lyra Ashwood had been forgotten her entire life. She worked in the palace kitchens, scrubbing pots until her fingers turned raw, and carrying heavy buckets of water up 3 flights of stone stairs before the sun even rose. The other kitchen girls, betas mostly, were allowed to complain when their backs ached. Lyra was not. An omega who complained was an omega who could be replaced, and there were always more omegas waiting outside the palace gates, hungry for any kind of work at all. She had learned, a long time ago, to make herself small, to keep her eyes down, to let her voice fade into silence whenever someone above her rank walked past. It was not weakness, she told herself. It was survival, and for 19 years, it had worked. Then came the night of the coronation moon. Once every 300 years, the sky above Veyrath turned a deep, impossible silver, and on that single night, the ancient Moonstone altar in the heart of the palace was said to wake. Long ago, before written history, the Moonstone had chosen the first rulers of Veyrath, binding its magic to whichever wolf could call its light. No one alive had ever seen it happen. It was a story parents told their pups, a legend half believed and half forgotten, until the night King Draven Voss was to be crowned. Draven was the strongest alpha the kingdom had seen in a generation. Broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, with a voice that could silence a room without him even raising it, he had spent his whole life being told he was destined for greatness. He believed it too. Why wouldn't he? Every wolf around him had confirmed it since the day he was born. The courtyard was packed the night of the ceremony. Nobles in silk and fur stood in neat rows around the altar, murmuring excitedly, each secretly hoping the old legend was true and that the stone might somehow acknowledge their family's bloodline. Guards lined the walls, torches burned high, throwing long shadows across the ancient stone slab that sat at the center of it all, dull and gray, utterly unremarkable. Lyra was not supposed to be there at all. She had only come because Cook had sent her to deliver a jug of water to the head steward, who was busy managing the crowd. She slipped along the back edge of the courtyard, trying to stay invisible, the way she always did. It did not work. "You, Omega." Lyra froze. She turned to find King Draven himself looking directly at her, his lips curled into something between amusement and disgust. The crowd near him quieted, sensing entertainment. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "This ceremony is not for kitchen girls." Heat rushed to her face. "I was only delivering water, my king. I'll go now." "See that you do." He turned back to the altar, already dismissing her from his mind. But one of the nobles beside him, a woman in emerald robes, laughed softly. "Perhaps we should let her try," the woman said, not entirely kindly. "It might be amusing. The stone hasn't woken in 300 years. What harm could it do?" A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Draven's mouth twisted into a smirk. "Very well. Let the Omega touch the stone, if she wishes to embarrass herself in front of the whole kingdom." Lyra's heart pounded. Every instinct told her to refuse, to bow her head and disappear back into the kitchens where she belonged. But something in her chest, something small and stubborn that she had buried for years, made her feet carry her forward instead. She approached the altar. Up close, the Moonstone was larger than she expected, its surface rough and cold beneath her fingertips. She had no idea what words to say. No one had taught an Omega the old rites. They were reserved for nobility, for alphas who had trained since childhood for exactly this moment. "Well?" Draven called out, clearly enjoying himself. "The stone doesn't answer weakness, girl. Go on, embarrass yourself. Or better yet, save us all the trouble and step aside." The crowd laughed again, louder this time. Lyra felt her cheeks burn, humiliation crawling up her spine. She began to pull her hand back, ready to run from the courtyard and never think about this moment again. That was when the Moonstone answered. Light exploded from the stone, not the dull silver of the moon above, but something brighter, older, alive. It poured out in waves, wrapping around Lyra's hand, climbing up her arm, and finally surrounding her entirely in a glow that turned the whole courtyard white. The murmurs of the crowd died instantly, replaced by stunned, frightened silence. Then the voice came. It rose from the stone itself, ancient and layered, as though 1,000 voices were speaking as one. It did not call for the king. It did not call for any alpha standing rigid with disbelief near the altar. It called a single name: Lyra. The light settled into a soft glow around her shoulders, like a cloak only she could wear, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, it faded, leaving her standing exactly where she had been, an Omega kitchen maid in a plain gray dress. Except now, every eye in the courtyard was fixed on her. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Draven broke the silence first, his voice sharp with disbelief. That is not possible. But the palace elders, old wolves who had studied the legends their whole lives, were already stepping forward, their faces pale with something between fear and awe. One of them, an ancient woman named Elder Marin, knelt slowly before Lyra, something no alpha in that courtyard had ever done for an Omega. The Moonstone has chosen its guardian, Elder Marin said, her voice trembling. For the first time in 300 years, it has spoken, and it has spoken her name. The following days were the strangest of Lyra's life. She was moved out of the servants' quarters, though she was given no real explanation of what that meant for her future. The nobles who had once looked through her now watched her with wary, calculating eyes. Some bowed slightly when she passed, uncertain of the right way to treat a guardian who had been an Omega only days before. Others refused to acknowledge her at all, as though ignoring the truth might make it less real. Draven refused to believe it longest of all. He ordered the elders to test the bond, certain there had been some mistake, some trick, some flaw in the ancient magic that had briefly malfunctioned. So they tested it. They asked Lyra to recite the old rites at the border wards, ancient protective magic that had been steadily weakening for years, drained by a slow, unexplained decay no one in the kingdom had been able to reverse. When Lyra spoke the words, hesitant and unsure of herself, the wards flared back to life, stronger than they had been in a decade. When Draven spoke the same words moments later, nothing happened at all. He tried again the next day, and the day after that, refusing to accept what every test confirmed. The kingdom's magic, the very protection that kept Veyrath safe from the hostile kingdoms beyond its borders, was bound to Lyra's voice, and to no one else's, not even the king's. It should have made her powerful. Instead, it made her a prisoner in gilded rooms, required to appear at court functions where she said nothing, and simply stood beside the altar like a piece of furniture that occasionally proved useful. Draven, forced to keep her close for the kingdom's survival, watched her more than he wanted to admit. He noticed the careful way she moved through unfamiliar hallways, still expecting to be scolded for taking up space. He noticed how she flinched, just slightly, whenever a noble raised their voice near her, an old habit built from years of learning to anticipate cruelty before it arrived. He noticed, too, that she never once asked him for anything, not comfort, not kindness, not even an apology, though he privately knew he owed her one. His disdain, which had once come so easily, began to feel harder to hold on to. One evening, weeks after the ceremony, he found her alone in the palace gardens, sitting near a fountain, her knees pulled up to her chest in a way that looked more like the kitchen girl she had been than the guardian she was now expected to be. "You should be at the banquet," he said, more out of habit than genuine concern. "I know," Lyra answered, not looking up. "I told them I felt unwell." "Did you?" "No." She finally met his eyes, something steady and unafraid in her gaze that surprised him. "I simply did not want to stand in a room full of people who still look at me like I don't belong there, even now." Draven was quiet for a long moment. It occurred to him, uncomfortably, that he had been one of those people only weeks ago, that he had called her worthless in front of the entire court, certain of his own superiority, certain that rank meant something real and permanent. "I said things to you," he began slowly, "before the ceremony. Cruel things." "You did," Lyra said simply. She did not soften the truth to make it easier for him, and something about her honesty struck him harder than any accusation could have. "I was wrong," he admitted, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in his mouth. He was not used to saying them. Lyra studied him for a moment, as though deciding whether he meant it. Being wrong once doesn't erase who you were the moment before you were wrong, she said quietly. But I suppose it's a start. She did not offer him forgiveness that night, and he did not ask for it. But something between them shifted, quiet and unspoken, a small crack in the wall that pride and prejudice had built. The peace did not last long. Word of Veyrath's strange new guardian, an Omega whose voice alone controlled the kingdom's ancient magic, spread quickly beyond its borders. In the neighboring kingdom of Ashgrave, ruled by an ambitious alpha named Kestrel Thorn, the news was seen not as a marvel, but as an opportunity. A kingdom whose protection depended entirely on one untrained, low-ranked girl, rather than a seasoned alpha king, seemed weak, vulnerable, ready to be taken. Kestrel moved his forces under cover of night, striking at the weakest section of Veyrath's border, the very place where the wards had only recently been restored. Panic spread through the palace, as scouts returned with news of the invasion, soldiers pouring across the frontier faster than anyone had anticipated. Draven mobilized his warriors immediately, his instincts as a battle-hardened alpha taking over. But even as his soldiers gathered, he understood a terrible truth. None of their strength would matter if the wards fell, and the wards would only respond to one voice. He found Lyra in the tower, where she had been kept during the chaos, her hands trembling, though her face remained composed. "I need you at the altar," he said, breathless from running. "The wards are failing. Ashgrave's forces are already inside the outer valley." Fear flickered across her face, quickly followed by something steadier. "Then let's go." They ran together through corridors filled with fleeing servants and shouting guards, the palace alive with chaos. When they reached the courtyard, the Moonstone altar sat exactly as it had the night everything changed, except now the sky above it was streaked with the orange glow of distant fires instead of silver moonlight. Enemy soldiers had already breached the outer courtyard walls. Draven placed himself between them and Lyra without hesitation, his sword drawn, no longer the arrogant king who had mocked her weeks before, but something closer to a protector. "Say the words," he told her, meeting her eyes for just a moment. "I trust you." It was the first time he had said those words to anyone who was not born an alpha. Lyra turned to the altar, placed both hands on its cold surface, and, with a voice that no longer shook, spoke the ancient rites she had learned in the quiet weeks since the ceremony. The Moonstone answered instantly, light erupting from its surface and racing outward toward the kingdom's borders, faster and brighter than it had ever burned before. The invading soldiers cried out as the restored wards surged to full strength, pushing them backward with a force none of them could withstand. Within minutes, Ashgrave's forces were in full retreat, driven from Veyrath's lands by magic older than any army. When the light finally faded and silence settled over the courtyard once more, Draven turned to find Lyra still standing at the altar, exhausted but unharmed. Around them, soldiers and nobles alike stared in stunned silence, witnesses to what her voice alone had accomplished. In the days that followed, Draven called the entire court together, the same court that had laughed at Lyra weeks before. He stood before them, not as a king demanding obedience, but as a leader finally willing to admit he had been wrong. "For generations," he said, his voice carrying across the silent hall, "we have measured worth by rank alone. We called some of our own people lesser simply for the circumstances of their birth. I was among the loudest voices who believed that lie." He turned to look at Lyra, who stood quietly to the side, no longer trying to make herself small. The Moonstone knew better than all of us. It did not choose an alpha. It chose the one among us, with the strength to endure everything this kingdom put upon her, and still answer when we needed her most. He announced, then and there, the end of the old caste laws that had ranked wolves by birth alone, laws that had shaped Veyrath for centuries, and shaped Lyra's entire life, until that single night, beneath the coronation moon. Lyra did not need his apology to know her own worth anymore. She had learned it herself, standing alone at an altar with soldiers approaching, and nothing but her own voice to rely on. But she accepted the change he offered, not as a gift from a king to a girl he once scorned, but as something owed to her and to every Omega who had been forgotten before her. In the seasons that followed, Veyrath began to change. Slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. Omegas who had once been confined to kitchens and stables found new paths opening before them. Betas and alphas alike learned, sometimes reluctantly, to see worth in places they had never thought to look. And at the heart of the palace, the Moonstone altar remained, glowing faintly even on ordinary nights now, as though satisfied that its choice, once so unexpected, had finally been understood by the kingdom it protected. Lyra never forgot where she came from, the ache in her back from carrying water, the sting of laughter aimed at her worth. But she no longer let those memories define her. She had been called worthless once, in front of an entire kingdom. It was her own voice, in the end, that proved them wrong.